Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. We are diving in now to episode 528. This is the second part in our 10th anniversary series. And we're going to be looking right now at sort of the present and the future of tech, especially here in New Zealand. Very pleased to have Bill Bennett and Sarah Putt joining us again for this episode. So, Bill, I might get you to do another sort of quick introduction for those that maybe have, if they haven't caught the other half, because we're doing sort of two episodes together here. Remind people where you fit into the big wide world of tech.
Oh yeah, I'm a tech journalist, and I've been writing about this stuff since Jesus was in short trousers. It's forever.
And Sarah.
Oh, kia ora. Yes, I'm Sarah Putt, and I write for CIO and Computer World. Possibly not as long as Bill has been writing, but definitely around Roman times began.
Wow, that's impressive. I feel like such a youngster. And it's not common. I would make those comments. Look, it was great to have you both on episode 527. And look, we're recording and streaming these kind of back to back online. For anyone that's watching any of the online stream and you're not familiar with the podcast, then you can get the New Zealand Tech Podcast through any podcast app to listen to later. And of course, we're always more than happy to have people watching when we do a live stream, as we are today, across LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So let's jump right in. Now we looked back on episode 527 a little bit about where technology was a decade ago, and we really have come a long way. Now I want to delve into sort of where we are now, just as a way of taking stock a little bit, and then looking ahead, which is really, I guess, the area that excites me and really has done for a very, very long time. And I've always enjoyed being able to look forward and predict and try and join up the dots and make good decisions now based on where things might be heading in the future. And that certainly has just been part of my business journey, my fascination with technology. So let's delve in. Sarah, maybe we can start with you as we look at where we've come to on the connectivity front here in New Zealand. And I know we discussed that a fair bit in the last episode, but just keen for a few thoughts from you, and then from Bill around where we are today with 5G, with high speed broadband here, which by my accounting is around a million times as fast as the broadband, or actually broadband's the wrong term, around the internet connectivity we had when I left school around 30 years or so ago.
Yeah, absolutely. You can almost hear that modem. Remember the modems when you connected the dial-ups? I mean, I can hear that noise in my head when you say that.
We were just playing it in the intro a moment ago, which you may have sort of subconsciously stuck in your brain now.
Yeah, you're reminding us of where we've come from and where we're going. And so, yeah, absolutely. Like fiber is has been a huge step change. And, we talked about in the last episode how the Telecommunications Act was revised in 2011, 10 years ago. But then it was again revised in 2018. But what we're looking at now is tinkering, is tweaking, is making sure that the landscape continues to be competitive and innovative. There's so much change that's happened that's enabled, what we can do today. And you can see that there's going to be incremental change, possibly more than massive change. And I'm interested to hear what Bill thinks on this too. But where fiber will just get faster because we've laid the groundwork, the most expensive thing, with this technology is the holes in the ground, and once that capital work is done, it's kind of incremental. But what will also be interesting in the next sort of 5 years is how we cope once the copper network goes. So there's that difficult transition now, taking copper away from people, and that's where the Commerce Commission and all the legal focus is at the moment, to make sure it's not an abrupt change, but there's a smooth change and no one misses out.
Bill.
Yeah, but by the end of next year, 87% of the country will have access to fibre, and probably of those people, getting on for 2/3 of those who can have fibre by then. I mean, we're already at 2/3 uptake on UFB1. So by around then, we'll probably be up to about 2/3, possibly more of the population will have it. So well over half of all New Zealanders will have a fibre connection by the end of next year. The scary bits are what happens where fibre doesn't go, or not so much scary, but the more controversial bits. I mean, that can be filled in with fixed wireless to a degree. There are places where it's still filled in with copper, which is not necessarily the best strategy. And the other thing that's happening right now is the emergence of a new era of satellites, the low Earth orbit satellites, which will fill in some of those holes. You wouldn't choose a low Earth orbit satellite service if you've got fibre, because it's going to cost you twice as much, and it won't perform anything like as well. But if you're stuck out in the WOPs, now the thing about the WOPs here, the rural fixed wireless networks, is there's actually two fixed wireless networks. There's two types of rural broadband. There's when you're within sight of a rural RBI tower, you get the city style 4G, 4.5, 4.xg, and soon to be 5G experience, and it can be fast, and the speeds are pretty close to what you see on fibre. You can get 70, 80 megabits per second, better in some places, a little bit worse in others. If you're another kilometre or so further out and you're on the rural bands, the performance can be dismal. It can be appalling. And those people are going to be the people that will benefit the most when satellite comes in. I mean, satellite's about twice the price. You'd pay probably $180 as opposed to $100 a month for a satellite connection. And you've got to buy a big satellite dish. But that extra $80 is really worth it in terms of what you're going to get in terms of performance. So I think that's where there's going to be a battleground for in that rural space over the next year or so, and there's going to be a lot happening there. And the two big carriers that have rural towers, that's Spark and Vodafone, and to a less degree, 2 degrees on those rural connectivity group towers. They're going to have to invest a lot of money and improve things, or they're going to start losing customers to other services. And I think that's what's going to happen there. In terms of what's going to happen in fibre, it's not going to change a lot. I mean, it can be faster, but the main change is going to be more people will have fibre. But what you may see a change is the way that the internet moves around your house once it gets into the house. So we're already seeing Wi-Fi 6 emerging. I think Wi-Fi 6 will be everywhere in the next year or so. And then next year, of course, there's Wi-Fi 7. And I think there's going to be a lot happening in that area when it comes to moving the signals around the house. And Wi-Fi is probably going to dominate. So everyone at some stage is going to have some wireless in their broadband, and pretty much everyone, except perhaps the satellite people at some stage, is going to have some fibre in their broadband. And to a degree, the differential between those things is probably going to start to disappear a bit, and you'll be more worried about what speed you're getting rather than how it's delivered.
I think one of the exciting things that we didn't necessarily cover in the last episode was just how limited we were in terms of, we had those data caps with just, the absolute sort of, norm. And in this period, we've gone to, uncapped broadband in so many cases, to some degree in our mobile connections. We've got connections certainly with big data caps. They then sort of tend to slow down, but we're very competitive internationally, I think, in terms of the connectivity we get. There are different price points in different countries. We're certainly not the cheapest, but we very much have world-class connectivity without that the broad limitation we used to have, where data caps were the absolute norm. Now, a number of other areas I'm keen just to sort of delve into quickly before we sort of look a bit further ahead in terms of where we are right now. Social media has I don't even know how to describe the role that it sort of fulfilled in society over this last decade, both good and bad. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they have such massive reach. LinkedIn as well on the business front, and then we've obviously got always this something new coming along around the corner, and Clubhouse we spoke about last week, but it has put that ability for people to bypass mainstream media outlets and just share with people. Now, I guess the forerunner to that was our online forums and message boards that started out, I don't know, 30 plus years ago. The CompuServes and AOL and varying sort of bulletin board services and so on. But really, that's evolved to where we've got this ability for anybody to put something out there, but also we've got the extremities of online celebrities and influencers who have this incredible power, in some cases more powerful than a lot of traditional media outlets. Sarah, have you got any comments to make on where we are right now?
That is a massive topic, isn't it?
I know.
Like you talk about your message boards and how places like Yahoo started and all that kind of thing. What was it? A list of 100 places you might want to go on the net to what we've got now. And we've got arguably state interference in people's elections, false news, fake news. We've got people just living in their own bubbles and being fed through algorithms that take them to places which have real world consequences. And we've seen the extreme of that happen in this country, sadly, with the Christchurch massacre like last year. We've seen the bad, the real, taking it out of control. We've seen a president of a massive country come to use it as almost as a weapon against their own people. And it's really fascinating how social media has taken over the news agenda, become the news agenda. In some ways, it's enabled people to talk directly to their public. And even in our country, we know our own Prime Minister is fantastic on Facebook. She's great on Instagram. If you've ever watched, she's got a massive following and she talks directly to the public. I mean, what a wonderful bonus for a politician to be able to do that. Until you take arguably, obviously, they all use it to different degrees. So it has completely changed it. And in doing so, it's upended the media, the traditional media. I mean, people like yourself, you've come in with new ideas and used social media networks in some way or form in a way you never could have, 20 years ago. So a really fascinating development and so interesting to see what picks up and what doesn't. Like when you think about TikTok, for example, which was the one that came out last year and really hit the stride through lockdown and all the rest of it. You think about that idea and you think that Vine was there 5 years before, this whole idea about 15-second videos and, short video pieces, and then they grow in population. Sometimes it's a timing issue, right? The technology might have been sitting there, but somebody came along and saw a way to just, supercharge it. So really, a really fascinating area.
Bill, to move on to the next topic, I'm thinking about where we've got to with the biggest global tech companies with their clouds, which have really extended. We talked in the last episode, AWS, Amazon Web Services. They were around 5 years old. We had Google really leading the way at that point as far as sort of online productivity, email, and documents and spreadsheets online. That has seen a transition on the Google versus Microsoft picture. Amazon still hold an incredible level of sort of market share and dominance as far as their AWS sort of offering, although Microsoft and to a lesser degree, Google are certainly encroaching on that, and I mean it's led to all three companies effectively, just being mind blowing in terms of their scale, and that's without, and that's putting Apple aside as well, who also are at that very, very large end, being, basically we're talking about $1 trillion businesses here. I'm not quite sure if Google are at exactly that point right now. They seem to sort of, bounce up and down a bit, but certainly the valuations of these businesses is mind blowing. But just some of your thoughts on sort of where we are now on that front. I know we were chatting about a couple of these things before we started the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's not as much choice as there was, and in that sense, it's definitely a lot less competition. I mean, if I think back to when I started writing about computers, we used to run a list, believe it or not, a list of the top 100 computer hardware vendors in New Zealand. And that was, there were 100. You could mention 100. You probably couldn't name more than 6 or 7 today. And those cloud companies, you're really down to the 3 big players. I mean, everyone else is an also ran. Even mighty IBM and Oracle are just nowhere compared with the big 3. They slightly play in different niches. I mean, although it's quite often positioned as though it's a head-to-head race between those 3 companies, Google is very much the catch-up, the third player in that cloud space. Microsoft is very sort of enterprisey, and it uses its history, its legacy, and its products, its things like its Office products and so on, as almost like a gateway drug for companies to get them into the Microsoft cloud. I suspect that Microsoft, although it still does make money from Windows and Office, that's secondary now, and it's really, it needs to be seen as part of the bigger strategy for the company. And of course, AWS is all embracing. I mean, AWS is everywhere. I simply cannot keep track of the new products and services and features and so on that are available on AWS. And I'm not sure if anyone who's, unless it's their job to just do that, can do it. It's years ago, someone from IBM talked to me and they said that their job was like standing in front of a crowd of customers with a fire hose of products, and it was spraying the audience with them. Well, Amazon does that, or AWS does that every damn week with its cloud offering and its features and so on. And that's the problem is that in some ways it's simplified the market. There's less competition, you've got fewer choices and so on, but it's actually also made it quite complicated in other ways and so on. And I don't think we're necessarily, businesses and all of us, in fact, are necessarily coming to grips with how to make best use of this at the moment. And there are all kinds of issues. I mean, if you're a large corporation, do you just stick with one? And what happens if that one goes down, or if that one falls behind an iron curtain? If you're a Chinese company and you're using one of these, for example, you're behind a curtain that you can't get. So there's all kinds of issues. There's things like data sovereignty and so on. It's a complexity that it's amazing. When I go, as I say, go back to the days when there were 100 top hardware companies, 100 top software companies, it looked pretty complex. But this is actually, in some ways, more complicated and harder to navigate. And quite frankly, I'm not quite sure how CIOs manage to keep on top of it all. Perhaps that's your job, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to in there and say that a number of CIOs I've been speaking to recently, notably thinking of BNZ, and I was speaking to TrustPower the other day, they really want to adopt a multi-cloud approach because they want to avoid that whole vendor lock-in. You don't want to be beholden to one vendor for, everything. And let's face it, that not everything's going in the cloud. I think TrustPower said they were about 50-50 at the moment. So so it's not all kind of, it's not all there yet. But that's absolutely right. The other thing you've got to think about it from a CIO perspective is the skills that their teams need to do, because they need to be able to switch between, AWS, Azure, Google and Google Cloud. So they're going through those. So I sort of say to them, how do you do that? How do you make sure you've got the right skills on the team? And they basically said it's a constant cycle of learning and relearning and unlearning. And that basically, if you get the basics and you understand the basics, it's just about fitting into the different environments. But what it means is if you're in tech, you can never stop learning. You can never say the book is closed. It's a constant skills change. And I think that's also going to see a change in the way we think about education, especially when it comes to digital skills. And this is, I'm sort of diverging a little bit, but this is a really top issue at the moment in tech, is a 3-year university degree going to prepare you for this incredibly dynamic environment, which Bill talked about, which is a different thing every week? Or do you go for a quick sort of, a course, a foundation course, move into the side of development, and then constantly doing micro credentials, micro courses, those sorts of things?
It's an interesting, Sarah, that you mentioned, TrustPower in there. I look back to quite early on in my IT career, and I was involved with putting in the first sort of local area network in at TrustPower, and I guess it was sort of early 90s going back away, and I look at a business like that, which is now one of our bigger organisations here in New Zealand, and their tech at that time, I mean, it was just so simple and so basic compared to where we are now, where they're an internet provider. They're generating power. The threads of technology just run through every aspect of that business, and I think we see that in sort of every direction that we look. That any successful business is either in some way sort of calling themselves a tech business in one way or another, or the threads of technology just run through them, to a huge degree. They're just so reliant on leveraging technology in some way to deliver what they deliver.
Well, that's a good point, because quite often we get pitched stories by companies like, say, the one I always come back to is Uber. I would say Uber is not a tech company. Uber is a tech-enabled company. If I go back to when I first started writing about computers, the case study that everyone talked about was American Airlines and its booking system. And what American Airlines did is it sold its booking system to other airlines, and it became, in effect, at one point, it became a booking computer system which was born out of an airline. It was still an airline. It was, it wasn't thought of as being a computer company, and yet Uber is basically a taxi firm, and yet people will tell it's a computer company. It's not. It's a tech-enabled firm. But who isn't tech-enabled? Well, I tell you who's not tech-enabled. The people that are nowhere, the people we don't see anymore, are not tech-enabled. You are. Everyone in that sense. Everyone's a technology company.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to what extent, and to how how innovative that different companies and even not-for-profit organizations are in their leverage of tech. There's a level of that you can probably match up to their success. And I guess that this is part of what fascinates me, and I know Bill, we've had these sort of discussions over the years, and maybe it's something in the tech podcast agenda, and you've said, Paul, that's not a tech story, but for me, I enjoy following those threads of technology, and yeah, what technology enables and what technology makes possible. Now, a couple of other things that I would like to cover briefly, and we may be running out of time again, and I'm wondering if we're going to end up with 3 episodes here. One for past, one for present, one for future. I don't know how you both feel about that, and when we would find the time to record it. But just looking at the clock, there were a couple more things that I wanted to mention, and you may both have some others as we finish up. Sarah, I didn't give you a chance to sort of just delve in whether you had any comments around those big tech players and I guess where Microsoft ended up landing. We sort of talked about before we started. They were a company that 10 years ago were really struggling in a whole lot of areas. And one of the topics that we talked about a lot on the podcast in that first probably year or so, and partly because those that were involved in the show had did a lot of work in the Microsoft space, there was this big interest in the show, which tended, if you look back, was a bit of a waste of time. Was a product called Microsoft Windows Phone. I think that was its name at one point. Windows Mobile completely gone off the radar now. What's that? Windows Mobile, and then it became Windows Phone. And also we just saw how Google were dominating Microsoft on the cloud front, as was AWS. But there was sort of a big change. So I'm just keen for you to talk to that before we cover off a couple of last topics.
Oh, definitely. I think, as you say, there's the big 5, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. And what is so fascinating is how they can retain their dominance. We saw Apple in the 90s go down and come back up again with mobile, arguably. We saw Microsoft go down. They came into the decade absolutely hobbled by that legislation, that lawsuit that they had that hovered over them for years. And then they came through and didn't get mobile and was stuck until Satya Nadella took over and said, okay, it's enterprise, it's cloud, let's go this way. And then we saw Amazon, which is just, obviously Jeff Bezos has announced he's stepping down as CEO. I mean, what an amazing founder he is, and what he's done, which is just almost reinvent our view of the way we work. The innovation in that company is massive. You can argue about monopolies. You can argue about the way the workers are treated. There's all sorts of places you can go in the Amazon, but you cannot escape the fact that it's ubiquitous and such a fascinating company. But what's really interesting with these companies is, again, how can they outlive their founders? How can they move to the next shift in technology when that founder has gone? Apple managed it with Tim Cook. Is Jeff Bezos going to manage it with Andy Jassy? Zuckerberg's obviously still there. And obviously Microsoft had the one in the middle, Steve Ballmer, didn't work out for them so well. So this is the other interesting thing, is that it just comes down to one person sitting at the top who kind of almost leads the direction of that business. I mean, IBM has not done so well with their chief executives of late. That's an example of a company that hasn't kept up.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look back and look at the different sort of mistakes and the different successes, and certainly Microsoft did very well with putting Satya Nadella. The board did in hindsight now a great job with that selection. I think in the probably when he came into the role, there was certainly a level of sort of excitement from people internally, but I think a lot of people were sort of sitting and watching and curious how it would play out. But we've ended up with a Microsoft that I guess has been a lot more empathetic than the arrogant Microsoft that we had really prior to Satya Nadella. Now, a couple of other things that are probably just very current. and part of this will play into I guess, what we do in terms of looking ahead, but just, looking right now, the role of Intel within the computing space has very much started to change over a period of years. They haven't been able to advance. They seem to have sort of got stuck and got a bit frozen with their innovation. And of course, we're used to Moore's law around the doubling of what's the terminology here? Doubling of, is it circuits, Bill, in a microprocessor?
Transistors, I think it's a number of transistors.
Every 18 months to 2 years, I think. That sort of increase in computing power has slowed down somewhat. But then we've had the technology in the ARM processors, which has just been so widespread. Every mobile phone, virtually every tablet having either ARM based chips or even the Apple Silicon, which draws on ARM's instruction set. And just in recent months, we've really seen a bit of a taste of the future as Apple have come out with started ditching the Intel chips in their computers, and Microsoft have I guess been dabbling in the space for, I know it feels like it's close to a decade now, where they've tried to bring in ARM-based processors into some of their devices. And it's not probably quite a decade, but certainly a good few years now. But Apple are really sort of showing what's possible there, and of course, Apple as a company we probably haven't talked about so much, but what an incredible dominance that they've had, and an ability to really be profitable within a space, particularly with the iPhone, versus a whole load of competitors in the mobile phone space who have mostly not been able to make terribly huge profits. Although in some ways you can't mention Apple without mentioning Samsung, who in the early days of their Android phones looked like they were just completely trying to mimic and copy what was being done by Apple. But now they're really such a powerful and a dominant company. I went through buying a TV over Christmas and a soundbar for it. And I ended up with a product that probably 15 years ago, Samsung wasn't even a name that I would have had much, if any, recognition for. But now very clearly dominant within that sort of home electronics in a way that I guess Sony was maybe a decade or so prior to that. So there's been just some interesting things in terms of the companies that are playing, and then we've got sort of looking at who's doing really well in New Zealand. Who would like to comment on that? Can I maybe pass over to you, Bill, first of all, on that, in terms of what's excited you in terms of the technology leaders here in New Zealand?
Well, can I just come back to Intel for a moment, because I think we missed something there, and that was that a moment ago we were talking about the top 5 companies, and probably 15 years ago, if you were looking at the top 5 companies, you would have said Intel will be there. And Intel is clearly a case of a company that misread the market and didn't recover. And the misreading was exactly the same as Microsoft's misreading. And if you remember back to the days when people used to talk about Wintel and how Microsoft and Intel were sort of partners in everything, Microsoft misread the mobile market and recovered. Intel misread the mobile market and did not recover. And that's the case study for what happens when you're big and you misstep. There's no, they didn't get a second chance. There's no coming back from that error. And I think we can possibly, I don't think Intel's gone burgers, but I don't think Intel's going to be a name to conjure with anymore at all. So I just wanted to make that point. getting on to New Zealand companies. Well, of course, you can't really get into this without talking about Xero. Xero's done awfully well, but the issue with New Zealand is, and it's the issue. Sorry, I meant Xero's done awfully well. The problem with New Zealand is we lack scale, and that's always been the issue here. And so what we have to do is we have to, what actually happens in New Zealand is we've got a whole raft of companies which are extraordinarily successful, but in like niches that are not really, they're not necessarily global names. So we have, the company which makes the equipment for designing washing machines and, yada, yada, yada. There's lots of very niche things that we do extraordinarily well, and we sell that technology to the world. But when it comes to, big names who are players on the global stage, probably not. The one that stands out, of course, is Datacom or Datacom, depending on how you pronounce that word, which is a regional superpower in technology. But that's about the only one that's had that kind of massive impact. Otherwise, we tend to do very well in niche things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Bill. And I mean, I think what Xero did, and bearing in mind in my own personal world, I actually used to work for their opposition for a couple of years. So I watched them really closely about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think what they really did was they showed it was possible. They said it was possible to create an international company, a software business, and they created an ecosystem and a belief that I think a huge amount of companies jumped on board and started thinking about. And you talked before, Paul, about tech companies and what's a tech company and all that kind of thing. I think a lot of tech is a state of mind. And I think what Xero did was that they shifted our state of mind and they said, look, there's this thing called SaaS, which we can get into. It's a way of, it's an OpEx rather than a CapEx. This changes the game. And you had companies like Pushpay go, hang on a minute, here's a way. Why am I tithing through my salary or whatever? And when I'm at church, why don't I just create an app for that? There's got to be an app for that. And then look how successful they've been with those evangelical churches in America. Massive, really interesting story. And so I think that what that company did was it created an ecosystem and a belief that we could actually play on the international stage. But to your point, where's the scale and how hard is that scale to do from where we are? Even things like lockdown have been a kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it meant that we couldn't get on the planes to have those face-to-face meetings with the people that matter in the Northern Hemisphere. But on the other hand, it meant everyone was Zooming, so we got that advantage anyway. So it's going to be really interesting to see what companies can get scale.
Yeah,
the other thing that I would say is if you look at internationally how people view New Zealand, they always believe that our agri-tech is a place where we can go, probably because of our history around agriculture. I don't see the innovation there yet. I don't know if anyone else is seeing it.
Oh, yes, there is. The Livestock Improvement Corporation.
Yes, good point.
Does fabulous work. I mean, the number of cows that we have in our dairy herd is actually dropping at quite a rate, but each cow is individually that much more productive, and that's the kind of technology which we do, which is world beating, and we do that so well. But again, it's like I said, it's everything we do well is niche, and if there's something that emerges here that does start to rocket on the go very well overseas. With the exception of Xero, they tend to get bought very early in their life cycle. So, and that technology, there's countless numbers of companies over the years where I've visited their headquarters, either here in Auckland or in Wellington or in Christchurch. And 5 years later, they've been bought out by someone in America, and some key people have moved to the States, and there may be a sales office still here. There's very much been a pattern of that. Which is, that's okay. That's innovation. I mean, the fact that you sell your business when it's worth 100 million and not $1 billion is, is still good. But it's back to that scale thing. We do have that problem with scale, and I don't think we're going to have a global scale business come from New Zealand. We're never going to have a Microsoft or a Google or a Facebook coming from New Zealand. We will have a Xero, but Xero is not on that tier at all.
No, no.
Well, Bill, we're probably starting to get into the next episode,
Yeah.
to sort of delve into the future, and you're sort of baiting me there with those comments. So I will sit back. There is certainly a bunch more that we could delve into, but I've got to say I'm really excited around where we've got to over this last decade, whether it's the success of Xero and the example that Xero, that Rocket Lab, that PushPay, other ones that are coming through, the examples that they set for Kiwis, for New Zealanders, that we can play on a global stage, that we can export bits, as we often sort of refer to it, the sort of the weightless exports, that we can use our Kiwi ingenuity, we can use the sort of place on the sort of edge of the world, as it were. We can use those creative talents to to insert ourselves into the economy globally, and of course there's the aspects of how digital and social channels have allowed us to really be a part of the narrative during COVID and during other troubles over this period, where we've had attention that we may well not have had otherwise. I saw somebody on I think it was LinkedIn sharing a view. I'm not sure what country this person was from, but they edited together a video basically talking about New Zealand's leadership from a political perspective, very much about Jacinda Ardern, and it was sort of spliced together content, much of it from social media channels, Facebook streams. Some of it certainly was TV type coverage. That this is something that probably wouldn't have been able to happen in in the decade prior, certainly not to the same extent. And look, regardless of your political leanings and so on, this is a part of what technology has enabled. There is more I'd love to delve into, but I don't want this episode to go too long, and we still want to talk about the future. So I hope we'll be able to twist both of your arms to join me for another episode. If not, we'll work out a way to delve into that next step, that future ahead, because I know we're out of time for today at least. So a huge thank you, Sarah Putt and Bill Bennett. Did either of you have any sort of little wrap up you'd like to just drop on the end of that, or you're okay if we finish up now?
No, I think that's fantastic. And once again, I want to say congratulations to you for holding the torch for 10 years and always coming out to us with some really fantastic opinions. And both you and Bill just getting out there and in the tech land and just sharing those points of view, because you're absolutely right. We've got to get better at tech, and and everything is tech. And I think we've got to take the advantage in what would go on in terms of our PR, if you want, for want of a better word, that this country has earned in the last year, and we can really mobilize it. So yeah, it's inspiring.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, good point about building on that profile that we have now. Which does give us, I mean, we have a window to use that for to sell our technology. Yes, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this episode. Now, of course, you can find us online at nztechpodcast.com. The show is available across all of the podcast apps and video streams across LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, if you enjoy catching and actually seeing who it is you're listening to. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us, and especially to those listeners who have been with us since the very beginning. And it's always so encouraging when I hear from people that have said, I've listened to every single episode. And so, yeah, really, really awesome. And look, we will be looking for your feedback. We'll have something coming up on the NZ Tech Podcast website in terms of a survey, as we're now starting to evolve the show to what it will be like for the next decade. It's something that I've thought about and we've talked about over the last sort of year or so, but this year we really are starting to see that, but would love to have anybody's feedback on that. And of course, you're welcome to connect via social media, or to email me, paul.spain@nztechpodcast.com. All right, thanks everyone.
New Zealand's Tech Podcast, the voice.